audience. This is a historic day in American history. It is Juneteenth, which is the date that the slaves, the last remaining slaves in Texas, learned that they were free and that the Civil War was over. This happened a couple of weeks after the Civil War was over. And just to kind of make the connection, I live 3 miles away from the Lexington Battle Green, which is where the American Revolution began. Okay, and if you kind of think that that having an aspiration towards human freedom and then that finally being attained on Juneteenth in 1865, it's quite an exciting transition that happened there. And it's the first time now in American history that this is now a federal holiday. So sometimes we get distracted by things that are good too.
Right, right.
One of the things that Andy and I work with a lot is sometimes boredom is really productive. so you don't want anybody to be fully engaged all of the time. That would be exhausting, right? So one of the things that is interesting is in international schools is get students really going on academic content and then give them a 15-minute break where they can go outside and play. Right, so it's kind of establishing rhythms of different forms of engagement. These are all things we can be thinking about.
That's so great. I love that example because you know, at Slate School, our curriculum here is project driven, and we see so much incredible playing of content. So you know, the children are working very intensely on something, and then, like you've mentioned, you know, they can move in and out of the classroom whenever they need to. So that's one thing that we're always trying to build the understanding of, like, what's my ideal learning space. And, you know, as you might imagine, 5-year-olds, if they're studying, you know, rabbits, you know, they're outside in the playground and there are rabbit families and they're playing their project, they're playing it. So I think that maybe we lose a little bit of that as we get older, and we would do well to keep it, because it really makes their learning so fresh and real to them and relevant. So what do you see as sort of the main barriers to engagement then?
Well, we if I could chip in here, Dennis, I think that. First of all, many schools and teachers actually ignore the need for engagement. They think, well, the curriculum is what it is, and the way we teach is as it is. So some schools, school charter chains, think that the teaching should be kind of strict, very demanding, no talking in the hallways and so on. And we're just going to demand loads of grit and resilience from you. So we're not going to spend much time kind of getting you enthused, excited. You need Algebra 2 to get into university. Suck it up and deal with it. And you're just going to need like grit and resilience. And so sometimes we ignore the need for it. Sometimes we misunderstand it. And a lot of our data comes from work in the Pacific Northwest with a network of schools. They decided they wanted to focus on engagement to really get their students achieving in high poverty situations in very isolated schools and communities from each other. And once we got going, we followed the ball with them. A group of principals decided that they wanted to observe videos of student engagement because they wanted a nice little instrument where they could go in and put check marks in boxes. Are the kids engaged or not engaged? And then to their horror, they found they had absolutely zero agreement on whether the kids were engaged or not, because you can't always tell by looking at them. You know, sometimes engagement looks like surprise with your eyebrows going up like this. Sometimes it looks like furrowed brows of concentration. So what you see with engagement or disengagement isn't actually always what you get. And then sometimes once the danger is ignoring engagement, and then the second danger is using it as yet another tool to control teachers with. So, you know, we survey the kids 3 or 4 times a year, say how engaged you are, or we walk into classrooms with a schedule and we observe teachers, or we develop rubrics on 4-point Charlotte Danielson 4-point scales. There's always 4 points. If my marriage was on a 4-point rubric, I'd be always emerging as a husband. You know, I'd never get to kind of level 4 basically. And
well, So maybe you're a lifelong learner, right?
Absolutely,
So I think that's
that's what
actually
it
a good
is.
thing, right?
And so we start to use these tools to kind of wag the finger at teachers and say, you know, your kids are not engaged and you need to sharpen up and smarten up. But really, as we go on to talk about in the book, and as we'll get on to a little bit later, we need to understand not only are teachers aware or can they be bothered, but 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 what's going on in the environment of schools, just as you said, Julie, before. What is that engagement in a way is already there, and lots of teachers, you know, the vast majority of teachers know how to get their kids engaged. That's why they came into teaching. You know, they want to put the light bulbs on, they want to light that fire, they want kids to learn something they didn't know before, they want them to be excited and enthused. Teachers know pretty much how to do this, but there is all kinds of stuff that gets in the way in the school environment, the assessment systems, the way we administer and run schools and so on. And we need to pay a lot of attention to those kinds of things as well.
You're kind of getting at something that I wonder about often, which is, there is no one solution for anything. And I think, certainly I've witnessed in, 20 years of education that so often we find something that's compelling and a good idea for us. And gradually it seems to be disseminated in exactly the same form to everyone. So if this works in Texas, then it's going to work exactly the same way in Boston. And we should be, attacking engagement just like the people do in Arkansas and California, and we're all the same. And so this should always work. So remove all the art of teaching and understanding your community and just do it this way because we know this works. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, about how we go wrong when we assume one solution's perfect for everybody.
I'd like to cut in here. Just as you were talking now, Julie, I remember I lived for 10 years in Houston, Texas, and worked a lot in the schools there. And I remember being in a 4th grade class, and the students didn't know what a snow day was.
Right.
They would get all of these assignments, kind of about sledding and snowball fights and all of this. And they were like, what's a snowball fight?
I agree. I grew up in Florida. And so I had the same experience. I know what that's like.
Right. And then there can be a mistake with that, which is that children can only learn about themselves, right, and about their own environment. So we don't want to kind of go that far. What's really fun about working on these books, and I have to say, very satisfying working with Andy as a co-author, is that I think that readers of our book will say, these are authors who are not afraid to take on some of our major slogans in education. Okay, and even if slogans are true, even if we should think about growth mindsets and fixed mindsets and deep learning and surface learning, even if all of these things are true,
right,
we can't forget our responsibility to be critical thinkers about each and every one of them. And in the professional development that Andy and I did, Andy would really push people, and I was kind of fascinated because I think it might have to do with kind of a certain aspects of Northern British culture, which is not afraid. Like if you watch American Idol, why is it that the Brits are always the tough ones, right? But not afraid to go to places where it pushes the envelope a little bit. Is this really true? Is this really high quality? Is this really what we mean? And I can remember vividly, Andy, you're really pushing around, is it really true that, we should be saying, we are not yet Olympian athletes? I mean, does that improve the situation if we say we are not yet fluent in Arabic and Mandarin? No, there's certain things where we have to be realistic too. And so I think that is really something that educators will enjoy. And if we can talk about how there isn't one size fits all, then the next step is, well, here's a whole panorama of things that we can try. And we do some very daring things. You can tell I'm very enthusiastic about the book, and now I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit, but engagement does not always need to be pleasurable. right? If you kind of think about yourself and you're really trying to solve a problem, you're really trying to get to the bottom of it. Maybe you're working with colleagues. Or if you think about 10th graders who are learning about the Holocaust or the Atlantic slave trade or reading the Diary of Anne Frank, that is not a fun book. Okay, so Andy and I will go, and it's been interesting in professional development how people will kind of push back and they'll say, well, why should we be thinking about suffering? We want everybody to feel great all of the time. Well, that is part of being a human being, right? And we all know that now after the pandemic. So I think that the book really opens up a full portfolio of ways of thinking about disengagement and engagement. And that's very, very fulfilling. I think working with this set of ideas and strategies.
Well, I wonder which way to go first. I guess I think I'd like for you to share a little bit about what the enemies of engagement are, because I think that sets us up nicely, as it does in your book, to talk about the 5 paths, the ways that we can get after it. So there are some other things that I'd love to circle back to about, in what you're saying, but I don't want to miss these bits, because I think that this is the heart and soul of your text, and I really want to lift that up so that people will get involved in this book. So maybe you could talk about that. What are the enemies of engagement? And I love that you're always positive, even if you're talking about something negative in the book. You're talking about how we can turn it around. Right. So let's recognize what the difficulties are, and let's turn those challenges into opportunities. So.
So I'll begin like a great politician with an answer to a question you didn't ask, but you did kind of share it with us beforehand, and then we'll get on to the enemies of engagement. First of all, you were going to ask us at one point, what's really full engagement like?
Yes, absolutely. Let's get at it.
Do we want full engagement? And to take an example from everyday life, 2 days ago, I was mountain biking just 25 minutes here from Ottawa in the woods, and came around a corner on my mountain bike, and less than 50 meters away from me, coming right across the path, was a huge black bear with 3 cubs. And so I screeched my bike to a halt, and held up a jogger who was coming behind me, and this incredible, awesome sight. And then the bear began to walk towards me. And so what do I feel at this moment? I feel full engagement. I'm definitely cognitively engaged. Like I'm very, very, very focused on what's going on. Emotionally, it's incredibly intense. It's one of the closest bear encounters I've ever had in my life, and I'm a little bit afraid. It's not totally fun. I'm a little bit afraid and alert, like you are on a hike in bad weather, or when you fear of failing in a project, or your speech as a valedictorian might go all awry, and you'll hit the wrong notes. I'm definitely behaviorally engaged. I'm thinking hard. So I begin to retreat because I need to know what to do with my body. And I'm spiritually engaged. This, by the way, is something that socio-emotional learning totally misses in America compared to the idea of well-being, which is the idea of spiritual engagement. And spiritual doesn't have to be religious. Spiritual can just be all about nature or wildlife or the wider world. So those moments when we're totally engaged, fully engaged, what Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi calls flow, are some of the things we really want. Those moments in life for ourselves, and we want those moments for our kids as well. But at the same time, we can't be in flow all the time. Life can't be a perpetual bear encounter. And if we're always in flow, we'll drown, basically. So we have to, part of engagement is knowing when to tone it down a bit, how to manage your enemies, not your enemy, how to manage your engagement. So before, Dennis and I have different ways of managing our energy during workshops. Before I go on, a couple of things I'll often do behind the scenes. One is I'll do some yoga stretches. Seems strange that I'm talking, but but the body and the mind work together. And I'll focus on somebody I've never met before, somebody in the audience, and I'll try and imagine what they've given up in order, it's kind of moral engagement, really, what they've given up to be there. And it underlines to me treating what I'm doing not frivolously or in a taken for granted way, but every time with immense importance. And then you have to balance your energy. So sometimes you can't test kids all day or prep test for kids all day. You got to take a body break. You got to walk away from things. You got to stretch. You got to do something trivial and fun. You got to color in something during online learning. As parents have sometimes been complaining when they're watching and say, well, they're not really learning anything. They're just chatting to each other right now. What's the matter with them? Well, that is all part of what school is and what learning is and what life is. So to understand the enemies of engagement, we first of all have to understand what engagement really is. And then Dennis, perhaps you can start off and get us into what some of these big five enemies really are and where they come from.
Awesome. I want to hear from you, Dennis. But before I forget, I want to say in the book there is a harrowing story about a hike that you both took together, and I was reminded of it by your story here, and it's worth the price of the book. I think actually, and I'm going to say also, I'm hoping I get this right. There's another story about a student that is this pretty incredible, and I think his name is Duganne, and it's. I'm just going to tease that to the audience because those two stories are so phenomenal that I just think they highlight such important points in what you're sharing with us and what you're talking about today and in the book that, so I'm just going to say, get the book, read the story about the hike and read Duganne's story and then get back to me on what you're thinking.
Okay, cool.
Dennis, go ahead. Please tell us.
So Julie, Andy, and I are a bit older now, and we give ourselves more latitude to talk about our own experiences, as Andy just did with the mother bear and the three cubs, and I'm sure that mother bear will make an appearance in some future writing.
Awesome. That's great.
And before we started our recording today, we were talking about relationships and how important those are for students. And I have a handicap, which is I can't go for more than a half an hour in any professional presentation without making a reference to my daughter. Forgive me, Andy knows about this. But the first form of disengagement that we have is disenchantment. And that's where school becomes boring and irrelevant and predictable. And so I was just talking with my daughter, who is now getting over the Delta variant of COVID-19. She's in London right now. And she was remembering being in her fourth grade class. And her teacher, Mrs. Nicastro, up in this old fishing village of Gloucester, Massachusetts, one day was in the classroom and a seagull flew in. and the teacher said, "Good morning, Mr. Seagull. Have you come to learn some mathematics?" And my daughter, who has a very lively imagination, said, "And I fell in love with her, and now we're still communicating." So, Mrs. Castro follows her. She's now 32 years old, across the Atlantic Ocean, right? But that's magic.
Yeah, definitely.
That's magic. Like, let's use our imaginations. I wonder what the seagull is thinking, right? And then you kind of think about those classic children's books like Black Beauty, which was amazing because it was written from the perspective of the horse, right? So the imagination is something that we lost a lot in recent reforms. And young people are interested in hobbits and in dragons and in muggles and in wizards and in unicorns and all of these things. And instead of kind of approaching these things and saying, well, I'm sorry, but this is not informational text. We are looking for informational text. Kind of just go with it and let the kids, thrive with their imaginations. So,
Dennis, can I chip in just a second?
Go ahead.
Because in the book we talk about probably one thing that everybody would agree with, which you don't really get to the same extent in the independent sector, and that is how high stakes testing just sucks the life out of all of that. And with many kids coming back after COVID now, there are too many people worried about learning loss. And I'm thinking, we intervene, we need to help them catch up. We need to bring back these tests. The National Centre for Education and the Economy has been talking about this. Checker Finn has been talking about this. Lots of the White House is not willing to let go on this. So probably every teacher listening to this will say, yeah, we standardized testing is part of that big enemy of disenchantment. But here's another little one, which is don't always put the standards on the board at the start of the lesson. Because the moment you put the standards on the board, you take away your capacity to introduce the lesson with a quirky start, a surprising start, an oblique entry. That fantastic moment where kids have no idea where this is going, but it looks really interesting, and they're prepared to stay with you. So testing is the big one, but also think about the little things. Don't always announce what you're doing. Don't always say what you're going to do, then do it, then talk about how you did it afterwards. Don't always have a 3-part essay. Don't always write a non-fiction book in the way the editors tell you. We break a lot of the rules in this book. We don't say we talked about this in this chapter and in the next chapter we're going to talk about this. We treat it like a novel, and so sometimes we'll have a sudden break between one bits of narrative and the rest. So think about a lot of the routine things that you do as a teacher that unintentionally can steal the magic from your lesson and steal the magic from, which is the literal meaning of disenchantment.
Can I just offer something here too? I'm in my classroom here, and of course the students are gone for the summer, but I have not too far from me this book sitting here, and it's the book that the students have created, and it's of this imaginary place called Yes and they began creating it last year, not this school year, but before we went out for COVID. And it started out as a very small thing. They were inspired by the work of the Bronte kids. And their imaginary lands, and they were inspired to create their own, and we were excited for them to do it, and there were a lot of conversations where they were talking about it, and what we realized in the course of the developing of Yes and the entire book is full. It's completely full of writing about the creation story, where people live. They even asked to create a constitution, so we had law students from the neighboring university come in and talk about what a constitution is, and all flowing from this idea of creating this place. And they dealt with so many things. And I want to say in some ways, the conversation about Yes and prepared them to be out for COVID, because there were things that happened in Yes and that, because they were happening in an imaginary place, could be grappled with and considered and understood by children much younger than able to deal with it here in their reality. But we had no idea that it was that kind of preparation. And so I would just encourage teachers to listen for those moments, because you have no idea what's in the penumbra, what children are actually preparing for, that you have no idea what's coming. And I think that was created in absolute preparation for the pandemic. So and it was a land of enchantment, and it continues to be. They
sounds
continue
beautiful.
to talk about it.
Sounds beautiful. Actually.
And move it along. But I think that's to be open to moments of enchantment as a guard against disenchantment.
Yeah.
Julie, if I could tag on to that, because I think what you're saying there is quite profound, really, is Well, we didn't know that COVID-19 was coming, but actually we have a new subtitle for the book on well-being, which refers to a volatile world. You did know, intellectually, you knew that we were living in a volatile world, right?
Yeah.
And you knew that you wanted your students to be empowered to address the challenges that happen in a volatile world. And that's another one of the forms of disengagement is disempowerment, right? And so what we have to kind of try and do is get out of the idea that if students are using their imagination, if they're exercising agency, if they're working on teams, that that's somehow fluff. You know, so like Andy and I refer at different points to the dragons of engagement, right? You know, they're standing astride the path. Now, the really big one is standardized testing, but there's still lots and lots of other things that can get in the way too. Now, if I could, I'd like to just say one thing for the traditional secondary school teacher who's kind of like, okay, this is all well and good, but you know, I kind of have to cover Spanish, or I have to kind of do algebra, or all of these different things. What I would encourage those colleagues to think about is, how can we help the students to think about a world in which there would be nothing more useful, nothing more empowering and connecting for them than the knowledge which you need to cover in that class. And I'd like to give an example from my own autobiography. I went to the public schools in Fairfax County, Virginia in the 1960s and 70s, when there was almost no Hispanic population there. It was white and it was African American, okay? It was the old South. And we were required to take a foreign language. And I decided to take Spanish. I have no idea why. At the time, it seemed completely useless. Like, why are they making me do this? You know, there's no Spanish speakers around. You know, I'm never going to go to Spain. Like, what a waste of time. Well, Julie, the world changed. And all of a sudden, I'm living in Houston. Both of my kids are born in Houston. My wife is a Spanish speaker. She's from California, but spent a lot of time in Latin America. And all of a sudden, Spanish is not just something useful, it's also something beautiful. You know, the old thing, Spanish is a loving tongue, and, you know, the poetry and the culture and the music, everything, right? And so even if you feel like you're in a traditional discipline, you can still work with the students using their imagination to help them to understand that the world is continuously changing. So you can build in enchantment, you can build in connections to the future world that's emerging. You can build in a sense of belonging. You can build in a sense of meaning and purpose, empowerment, all of these things that we discuss in the book. And then hopefully the students will feel like, wow, I'm really learning a lot. I'm learning about myself and I'm learning about others. And this is just the most exciting adventure. Andy and I, to a certain extent, I think, I don't know, we're both realistic and romantic. We're romantic because Andy has written about in his memoir and a bit in his book about his old teacher, Mary Henley, who was a brilliant teacher. You can tell that the writing just sparkles off the page with the kind of teaching that she was doing in the north of England back in the 1960s, right? And so there is some romanticism there because we want the emotional connection. But there's also a realism because all of the testing and standardization hasn't worked. It hasn't improved engagement. And we're not going to get to deep, meaningful learning without engagement. That is a big theme in the book.
Beautiful. Oh, you're muted, Andy. We can't hear you at this moment.
There are 4 other enemies of engagement, as well as this first one that we've been describing, but they fold in virtually everything that we've talked about. So as well as disenchantment, when your kids are engaged, are they really just kind of bored and can't be bothered, or are they disconnected from the curriculum? And we've talked about all kinds of ways in which, you know, the curriculum does not connect with kids' lives. This, by the way, doesn't mean following their interests. In Canada, I spend a number of hours each week with my 3 grandkids in virtual school, twin 6-year-olds and an 8-year-old. And last night I watched the 3rd Harry Potter movie with them. They're 6, right? And they absolutely gripped by the imagination of it. And through their education, at the age of 6, they're learning about race, they're learning about prejudice, they're learning about unhealthy sexual relationships or personal relationships. They're learning how in Canadian history, residential schools forcibly removed children from their Indigenous families, from their language, from their community, and what the consequences of those are. They've not discovered those things by themselves. They, right? Teaching is about introducing kids to things that are compelling and important. So they can do kind of wild and weird imaginative things like Harry Potter, and it's not either or, it's as John Dewey totally understood. Most things are both and, not either or. Third is we talked about belonging. Dennis just talked about belonging and all the things that threaten belonging. One of them is isolation. Most school shootings are perpetrated by kids who were in one way or another isolated at school, loners, outsiders. We have one in Canada who just ran into 3 generations of an Islamic family with a flatback truck, homeschooled along with 5 other kids, not part of a community. When we have honors courses, are we separating kids from kids? When we track, when we stream, are we separating kids from kids? When we have algorithms that reinforce people's preferences, are they also reinforcing people's prejudices? And how do we attend to that or do we just kind of let it go as teachers in the school? The fourth is disempowerment. And so, again, we've talked a lot about the importance of student voice, of being involved in what they're doing, being able to articulate, being able to select some, but not all, of what they study and how they study it, how they learn it. And the last, I know Dennis loves to talk about this, is we do talk in the book about, we have a very yin-yang relationship to digital technology, very important coming out of the pandemic. Not to dismiss it, but not to be totally mesmerized by at the same time. So Dennis, can you talk a bit about digital distraction? Because I know this is something that's particularly important to you as the 5 dis.
Right. So, well, first of all, if I could just, Andy, there is a colleague who
Yes.
typed up something in the chat there that I would like to respond to because it's important. The colleague Nora Krieger asked about how do we persuade policymakers who are really into data and bringing innovations to scale, how we persuade them. And I would like to say, I would like to send to you, it's an article, I'll figure out if I can upload it. It's by Richard Elmore, a late Harvard professor who became very famous for the idea of getting to scale. So in 2016, he wrote an article for the Journal of Educational Change, which Andy was the founding editor of and led for many years, and subsequently I became the editor-in-chief. Richard Elmore wrote this article called Getting to Scale. It seemed like a good idea at the time. And it is a blistering critique of that concept from somebody who looks back and says, I had no idea that this was going to be used in such a destructive way, to kind of just like try and ram reforms down educators' throats, completely ignorant of the context. And I don't know of any essay written by anyone, with the possible exception of Diane Ravitch, who was very critical of her years working in the first Bush administration, that is so critical of a concept. And so that's one thing, is the Elmore piece, which I'll try and figure out how to upload here. And if not, we can figure out how to do it subsequently.
You can send that out.
Okay. So that's one piece there of the getting to scale. And the second one has to do with the fidelity of implementation, which, as Andy was saying, with that example of always putting up the goals for the lesson, even if it's a kindergarten class and the kids can't read it. We have to kind of, those are distractions that we put in, right? That we have to take responsibility for. And then Andy was just bringing up the issue of digital distractions, which is like right now, honestly, there was a survey out that 75% of American adults now say that they are addicted to their phones. And so what does that mean? Well, you can see it when you're driving. You can see it when you're at a playground and the adults are not talking to each other, interacting with the kids. They're in their phones. And then you can also see it in schools, right? In my spare time, I read young adult novels because I want to try and understand this younger generation. There was a very good piece in Educational Leadership about teaching Black boys in schools. And the author at the end said, well, we have to make sure that we're not putting out ideas of Black male masculinity that are stereotypical. And so gave the name of 3 LGBTQ novels with Black male protagonists. And I don't know if there's any young adult novels being written today where there isn't a lot of SMS messaging embedded into the text. So it's become so deep in the corpus callosum of our young people. And in all of these young adult novels, they're texting like crazy during their instructional time. During their instructional time. And he got me going on this British TV series, Ackley Bridge, and the same thing that's going on. The poor science teachers trying to do a lesson on photosynthesis or something. And the kids are just like in this flurry of activity. This is something I do think we can get from mindfulness activities in schools, which is calming the body, quieting the mind, and trying to slow it all down. And I did a book with a 4th grade teacher here in Boston. It's called The Mindful Teacher. We came up with these different principles of mindful teaching. And one of them was stopping, one of the 7 principles, not slowing down, stopping, coming to a complete halt. And if we ever did professional development with teachers, or we were working with students, we asked which of these 7 principles of mindful teaching would you want to work on the most? It was always stopping. They're always kind of like, my mind is racing away. I can't slow it down. And the digital age that we're in is like the monster thrashing us on the backs that I don't know how we quite get beyond this, but I hope that we can, for the sake of deep learning, because we'll just have surface learning if everybody's continuously distracted.
One thing we try and do in the book, Julie, is we don't rush to the temptations to ban digital, which is what some Google executives do with their own children, by the way, in school, which is kind of interesting. Or even to have less of it, to have less of a bad thing. But we have many examples of positive uses of digital. We believe some of the transformations in assessment that can really occur beyond large-scale standardized testing will come through various uses of digital feedback. And I don't just mean algorithms, but we mean, sharing photos, images, examples, screenshots of kids' work with the kids, with each other, with parents, and so on. But we do put up there what at our CHENINE Center in Ottawa, we've called an ethical charter for technology. It has 10 points, and you'll be relieved to know we're not going to go through them all now. But 3 are worth drawing people's attention to think about. One is we believe that every single school should have, and district should have an ethical technology group, call it a committee or a working group or a learning community that constantly looks at the opportunities and the risks and has strategies to deal with them. Online bullying, digital addiction, adolescent girls always enhancing the images of themselves. And so that second is to make really thoughtful decisions together as a staff about when and where any resource adds unique value. Paint, science equipment, soccer balls, manipulatives, and digital resources. So don't talk hybrid, which assumes that half will be digital and the other half will be everything else, but just infuse it with everything else and then decide. And then when you bring it in, don't just chuck it in and hope for the best, because we have examples of school districts saying it just threw them into chaos, but actually introduce it in a disciplined way through inquiry. Try something, see how it works. If it works, try it with a few more, or spread it around, and do that with any innovation, including digital.
Beautiful. So I can't even believe it. We're running out of time here. We haven't even mentioned our 5 paths to greater engagement. And so I'd love to sort of, I guess I want to tease them at this point, because we've got about 3 minutes left, and then just encourage everyone to buy the book, and then perhaps make a shameless play for you guys coming to visit us at Slate School, and or perhaps also having another opportunity to talk in maybe a month or so.
Yeah.
So because I think that this is a conversation that is more important than just the 3 minutes that we have left.
Yeah.
So if it's good for you, if you'd like to share what those 5 paths are, we won't be able to go into them in depth, but I think it does give people a taste of what they can find out more about. What do you think?
Okay, let's take them rat-a-tat, one at a time. Dennis, do you want to start, and then we'll rotate?
Perfect.
The first one we've covered in some detail already, which is enchantment, creativity, magic. So kind of making sure that there's that sparkle in instruction, and that students are in some way transported to another dimension, which Julie, your example was really great about how that can be done with a curriculum. The second one, Andy, do you want to?
The second is importance. So importance is really, do kids think what they're doing has value? Do they think it matters? Are they learning something that will make a difference in their lives, in the world, actually? More and more kids are, this is becoming increasingly important for more kids right now. That way, it's not just COVID-19, it's climate change, it's Black Lives Matter, it's many things going on in the world that our kids want to be part of. So do they really feel what they're doing isn't just so that they can get on to the next class or grade or stage or college, but has importance in the learning itself? And third, Dennis.
Third is attachment and belonging. So, after Anders Breivik killed all of these young people in Norway several years ago, and that must be about 7 years ago, that horrible massacre. The fundamental issue is he felt no sense of attachment or belonging to everyone. And so the Norwegian national response was to say, who are our outsiders? Who are our outcasts? Everybody needs a sense of attachment. And I love this old expression that everybody needs one adult who has an irrational attachment to them. So it's kind of making sure, as we do a scan of our classes and of our schools, who's always by themselves? Who doesn't seem to have formed an attachment? So all these things that we do, and we do have an advantage in US schools because we do a lot with extracurriculars, with athletics, with debate teams, with theater, orchestra, and all of those things. Those are very, very important for building full engagement.
And finding ways to belong to people who are different from you, as well as ones who are the same. In our schools in the Pacific Northwest are very isolated, and one of the great things they did was that they got kids to share writing, to share videos about their communities with each other in very different communities. Poor white kids with Mexican farm laborers, with people on indigenous Native American reserves. So finding belonging just doesn't mean the physical people around me. It means people you can't see as well as people you can, people who are not like you as well as people who are like you. Fourth is voice and choice, which is the empowerment thing. It doesn't mean schools are democracies. Kids don't get to decide everything, but the best communities, including lots of our Native American communities, listen to people. Everybody has a say, everybody has an input, everybody, even the bully, is treated seriously with respect, and their perspective, before there's a consequence, their perspective is heard and acknowledged. I work a lot in Scotland, And when I go around schools in Scotland, a national emphasis is, and you can see it everywhere, is you ask a child what they're learning and why they're learning it, and they can tell you. They can tell you in 3rd grade, they can tell you in 2nd grade, they can tell you in 12th grade. So voice and choice, not on everything, but much more voice and choice is important.
Great.
Okay, and then the 5th one has to do with focus and mastery. So everybody needs to be good at something. Okay, and so this is one of those areas that may surprise people a bit, but we think that we might be overpraising students in a number of cases for simply doing things that they should do. And if you hold back a little bit with that and make sure that students earn something a bit and then save up the praise for a sense of accomplishment, that is something that I think is profoundly gratifying for our young people. So all of the things that we did under the, kind of, it's hard to say, it was idealistic, but it was misplaced, the self-esteem movement back in the 70s. All this telling young people through the doors of our school, walk the most wonderful students in the world, all that over-the-top stuff. The research showed that really did not promote engagement. It actually promoted passivity and gave students an inflated sense of self-worth. So we went back, we studied all of that literature, and because we are critical of grit doesn't mean that we're not in favor of hard work. And so that is another one of the components. And we try to be very explicit that students might be sitting there really frustrated with a math problem, and that can be full engagement.
And fantastic, actually. And they could be feeling great about that.
Yeah.
I have behind me this learning journey, this rope that hangs here. And I've said it so many times, but it continues to be true. The kids in our school are very focused on the learning journey, and that it's continuous throughout your whole life. And, one peak follows one valley. And they can now sort of demonstrate for us by pointing to the spot on the learning journey where they are in something that they're trying to be able to be good at. Gentlemen, you have been spectacular, and I hate to go, but we have to, because we have another conversation coming up. And I have to say to everyone one more time, get this book. It's exquisite. And then please let's find a way for you to come back and talk with us again.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thanks for everybody for your participation.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, everyone, for coming in on a Saturday morning.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you again.
Yeah. Bye-bye,
Okay.
Julie.
Bye-bye. Take